You may have heard of the term service accommodation, or sometimes called short stay lettings, or even SA or holiday lets. In this video, I want to explain to you what it is, why you might want to use it, and how it works. So what is this short stay letting strategy that people are talking about? Well, if you think about a hotel, it's a little bit like that, where people are going in to stay for a short period of time, maybe even like a guest house or a bed and breakfast. Essentially, it's not people's main home. They're staying there for a short period of time. How is it different from traditional lettings? Well, people in a HMO or a family house or an apartment will be living there as their main home. Here, they're staying for a short period of time. And what that also means is the amount of profitability for you can be significantly higher. Right now we're in this beautiful building that's operated by my good friend Sam Cooper, and also somebody I work with. So let's go over now and meet Sam and talk about how this strategy works. Sam is also going to show us around this beautiful apartment that he has here, but make sure you watch all the way to the end, because at the end we are going to share with you the 3 biggest mistakes people make in this business. Sam, thank you so much for inviting us into your beautiful service accommodation property that you have here.
No problem at all.
So before we get into the details of how this strategy works, tell me, why do you think it's such an appealing strategy? Why is it so many people are fascinated with service accommodation?
Primarily, it's down to the cash flow. You can earn a lot more cash flow from a service accommodation unit than you could for the same unit being used as a single let. So essentially, it just really comes down to cash flow.
So ultimately, we're taking the same property that we might use for a different purpose, say a traditional let, and making a lot more money from it. That's primarily why it's so interesting. Exactly. And of course, it doesn't need a huge amount of money necessarily to get started as well. Mm-hmm. So I said they're probably the 2 main reasons people are really interested in the strategy. So fantastic cash flow, and don't need a huge amount of money to get started necessarily. Sam, we've known each other for a little while now.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, we met quite a few years ago when you were running the Coventry Pin event.
Yeah, that was a few years ago. I think it started at 7 or 8 years ago.
Yeah, something like that. So, I've kept tabs on what you're doing over that time, and I've continued my property journey through that. I actually got into the service accommodation space probably just over 3.5 years ago, something like that, where we took one of our single let units, and we'd come across the service accommodation strategy and just thought, well, it's a good opportunity to try it out while the unit was empty. So we furnished it. We made sure it was all kitted out, ready for somebody to use as like a home from home, and then tried it, and it's worked really well ever since. And I know two years or so ago you set up your Inner Circle program.
Yeah, just over 2 years ago now.
Yeah. So as soon as you said you were doing that, I jumped on board and said, yeah, it'd be brilliant to get on board, because I knew that you'd be able to take me to the next level. And this apartment that we're sat in at the moment, we took on just after I joined the program. So yes, we've had these apartments just over 2 years.
Yeah, so just for a little bit of context, so the building that we're in now is actually a block of 8 apartments, and half of those you've taken on to manage and run and operate as a short stay.
Yeah, that's correct, yeah.
So we worked together on the Inner Circle for about a year, and now we're working more closely together in terms of you're helping me support and train people that are starting off in property, but we'll talk more about that in a little moment. But what is it about this particular strategy you felt that was right for you? Why did this one work so well as opposed to so many different strategies that are out there?
Yeah, so we looked at quite a few strategies when we were looking to do something different than single lets. So we've got a small portfolio of single lets, and we were looking for a cash flow strategy essentially. So we were looking at different options, and the reason we liked the service accommodation model so much is because there's very little you need to actually do at the front end to get the properties set up and ready to go. So for example, I know you're big into HMOs, but sometimes you need quite a large input of cash if you're going to purchase the HMO and refurbish it. We hadn't got that kind of capacity available to us at the time, so we were looking for something where we could generate cash flow quite quickly. So essentially, the difference between how do you get a service accommodation unit ready to go versus how do you get a single let unit ready to go is basically you furnish it. So that's pretty much what you do. So you do have to spend some money. You do have to spend some money to obviously deposits and things like that. And there are ways around of kind of minimising the amount of money that you need. But you do have to furnish the property as well. And how you furnish it, or to the level of you furnish it, is really dependent on your guest type. Really.
Okay, so we'll get into the nuts and bolts of the type of property and who we target that to. In terms of running the property as short stay or service accommodation, what kind of return can we expect to achieve? So if someone's starting out on this strategy, how much can they look to make? So just before you answer that question, I know when we first started looking at service accommodation a little while ago, IDAS in the team runs that side of the business, the short stay business for us. I was a little bit hesitant to jump straight into it because I thought it would take our eye off the ball in terms of what we're doing, which is predominantly HMOs and flips. But actually a lot of it was about understanding and putting the systems in place, which we'll talk about in just a moment. So when somebody's starting out, what kind of cash flow should they be aiming for? What can they potentially create?
Okay, so you really want to be aiming to be making somewhere between £500 to £1,000 per month. So that's net, kind of net cash after you've taken all your costs off per month, into your account. And that also depends on which strategy you go down as far as how you actually manage those service accommodation units. So really there's three main routes. So you can either purchase a property, and so that's a property you own and you run it as service accommodation yourself. You could rent a property, which is essentially where you go to a landlord and you say, right, I'm going to guarantee the rent for this property for the next 5 years. I'm then going to let it out short term. So you then make the margin in the middle. So you pay the landlord each month whatever the normal going kind of rent would be. But obviously because you're letting out short term, you can then make a margin in the middle. And then the third route is you can effectively manage the property on behalf of somebody else. So I call it, you effectively become a turbocharged letting agent. Yeah. So essentially you're letting the property to other people, but you're just managing it. So you don't own it, you don't have the risk of having to pay the rent each month. You're basically just taking a percentage cut of the gross income that comes in.
Yes, so you've got to learn the techniques that you need, the strategy to be able to do it well, and not make the mistakes that sometimes people make when they're starting off in a brand new strategy. But ultimately, as you said, you can make great cash flow. So typically on a property, let's say it's a typical 2-bedroom apartment, that market rent might be say £750 a month as the market rent. So you're probably netting 4 times that. So if it's £750 a month, you're typically that would translate into about £25 a night as a rent if somebody's staying long term with you. But when someone is staying short term, a little bit like a hotel, it's going to be probably 100, 120, 125 pound a night. So that's why you're able to make so much more money. But I guess the key thing is it's not just about providing accommodation, you're providing a kind of packaged service. And
it's also, there's only certain properties that will work for HMO, for example, which is another obviously good cash flow model, but there's only certain properties that are suitable to be converted into a HMO. You can't really turn a 2-bedroom apartment into a HMO because it's just not big enough. But what you can do with this is obviously cash flow it by using it as service accommodation. So you're taking what would normally be, as you say, a rent of $750 a month, and gross income you're probably going to generate somewhere around $2,500 a month. So there is a big uplift in that initial cash flow that's coming in. So,
in terms of a product, then we talk about this is quite different from a single let or a HMO. So let's talk a little bit more about what type of product do we need to create.
Okay, so I think that really comes back to your understanding who your customer is, really. And I'm a great believer in any business is start with your customer first.
Absolutely.
figure out who it is that you're trying to serve, and then you can create a product that then suits their needs.
Yes. So what springs to mind straight away there is starting with the end in mind, who it is that we're going to serve.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that you can have 2 or 3 different customer types. Again, that's really important from from the service accommodation strategy, is being able to have those different options available to you. If you were just reliant on one particular guest type, for example, and for some reason, I mean, obviously all the issues that have gone on recently, with the whole COVID thing, if you were just reliant on tourists, your business would be, in trouble, I would suggest. Now, something we've been able to, that's helped us get through the last sort of, few months, is the fact that we had quite a wide range of different guest types and different customer types. So when you're creating your product, your apartment, you need to make sure that it is set up so it can accept those different sort of guest types and different customer types. You would normally set it up to be of a higher standard than you would probably normally do for a standard single let. Again, depending on where you're aiming that particular product at. So,
I guess a great way to start is to put yourselves in the shoes of your potential customer, as it were, and the experience that they're going to go through, what it is that they'd expect to be looking for. And we talked about, or you just mentioned, the tourist market. So for example, if you're on the south coast around Devon, that's probably a very strong market for people staying. They're kind of leisure guests. They're staying because they're enjoying the area. That's what they're there for. They're there for to have a short break, a short holiday. And as you mentioned with the COVID recently, that completely shut down that market. So it's having an alternative that we can switch to, rather than having complete dependency on one type of product. So you're creating a product for a certain type of audience, but then having some flexibility. So the different types of guests we're talking about, so we've got leisure guests, we've got corporates, which are effectively business people coming and staying for work. That might be Monday to Friday, they go home at the weekend, and contractors as well. Yeah,
and you've also got different kind of segments within those sort of broad areas as well. So we're obviously based in the Midlands. Not many people go on holiday to Birmingham or Coventry, or you'd be
personally, I think Birmingham is the centre of the world, but it's okay. I'll let that one slip. You carry on.
You might find a few more people kind of holidaying at home over the next sort of few months, but generally it's not a holiday destination as such, but it is a tourist destination. You do get people visiting the city, not necessarily for work, but they could be visiting friends or family. They could be, they might have kids at the universities. So the families will come and visit. And you do get people from all around the country and from overseas coming in to sort of see, especially over in kind of Warwickshire. So there's different types, and within the contractor market or within the corporate market, we break things down into different types of workers. So you could have contractors, so they're people working on building sites, construction sites, infrastructure projects. It could be office workers, so they could be here on secondment from a different office somewhere, so they could be working locally. So there's a whole kind of different segments within those higher groups as well.
Yes. So it's really interesting that you mentioned that, because often we think about certain segments, but there's sub-segments underneath. Yes. Just the one about universities. So we've got several universities in the Midlands, and you can think, well, the students are not going to stay in short stays. No, you're absolutely right, they're not. But the parents, when they come to visit them, friends, they'll stay in this type of accommodation. It's like an alternative to a hotel. So rather than somebody staying in a hotel, this is the type of accommodation that they're going to use. And contractors, it seems to be a core part of the type of guests that stay with us in our short stay properties. We've got quite a few software engineers from Europe at the moment working on quite large projects, and they seem to be, they come, they go. They've got other ones that are staying with us as well. So that's working really well. Yeah,
and I think if you look at it from from the business's point of view, the company that's actually putting those guests in, as opposed to hotels. So you would normally, if you look to the cost of it, it actually works out a lot more cost effective for them to share a house, for example. So if they rented a 3 or 4 bedroom house, they could house 3 or 4 of their guys in a house, and it'd be more cost effective than them renting 3 or 4 hotel rooms. Because a hotel room, you're not going to get one for much than sort of £50 a night. So if they're going to rent 4 rooms, you're talking £200 a night to rent, to house 4 guys. And the other side of it as well, especially that's been highlighted over the last few months with the COVID situation, is the company can control their environment as well, where the guys are staying. Whereas before, if you obviously put the guys into hotels, there isn't a lot of control that they've got over, kind of who comes and goes from the hotel, where they're going to have their dinner in the evenings. Obviously, whereas here we've got full cooking facilities, and they can obviously control who comes in and out of the apartment as well. So it's so from a company point of view, it ticks a lot of boxes from a health and safety point of view.
That's such an important point that you make, that the type of product, although we talk about hotels, they're not necessarily the same thing. Mm-hmm. So for instance, there'll be many reasons why somebody will want to stay in a property like this over a hotel, unlike some of the ones you just mentioned. Yeah. But also that makes us think about what types of properties can work for short stays. Often we think about apartments, city centre, but actually there's many other types as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, whenever you talk to people about serviced accommodation, they think, high spec apartment in the middle of a city centre that's probably going to be used for, somebody going out on the town for an evening and they'll come back and have somewhere to stay. But that's only a really small part of the, of the picture, really. And in fact, it's probably one that us as a business have kind of kept away from, because generally, if you're going to have any issues or any problems in the business, it's probably people having parties in high-end apartments in the middle of city centres. So we've deliberately kept away from that sort of world. And yes, there's a whole other raft of guest types and properties that can be used, from sort of one-bedroomed apartments all the way through to cottages, through to 3, 4-bedroom, 5-bedroom houses, or quirky ones. Recently there's been I believe there's been permission granted for what was an old toilet to be turned, one of those toilets that was underground in a city centre, to be turned into an Airbnb. So it's pretty endless, really, the opportunities and the ways you can think about, okay, could this property work as a serviced accommodation unit?
So we just touched on city centre apartments there, and that's just reminded me that one of the reasons this strategy is so popular is there's a huge amount of people teaching it as well. So the awareness is a lot more than it was a few years ago. I remember I was mentoring somebody in the property space who'd been doing this particular strategy for nearly 20 years. Yeah. I didn't know it existed. Now, just to be clear, I wasn't mentoring them on service accommodation. I was mentoring them on their property business as a whole. They were certainly much more knowledgeable than I am about service accommodation. But the point being, it's been around a long time. But what's made it popular is more and more people are teaching it, which is great, because it's a fantastic way to really get financially free relatively easily, as long as it's done properly. And my concern is there is a number of people teaching this, let's say, that are maybe a little less scrupulous. They're not completely honest about how the strategy works. Yeah. And I think it's really important to lay the strategy out properly and be aware. So for example, people talk about there's no regulation as such, but actually there are a few things you need to think about. So for example, if you're in a block of apartments, you need to think about, have you got the freeholder's consent? Yep. Have you got permission to be able to run a short stay? Mm-hmm. If there's a mortgage on the property, a buy-to-let mortgage, often the lenders won't allow consent for short stay. Mm-hmm. And there's also things like, for example, maybe permission from the council from a planning point of view, and each of the local authorities are different. What's their view on it? And some of them, if you use a term like service accommodation, they won't have a clue what you're talking about, because it's not a dictionary term. It's just one of these slang words that gets used within our property industry. Yeah. But essentially, these are things that do require some consideration that people don't really spend enough time thinking about. I think when you're building something within property, it's important that it has some longevity, it has a solid foundation, and you can build up from it. There's no point being financially free for a year and then the whole thing implodes. Yeah, sure. So it's thinking about the longer term. Yeah. So coming back to location then, so we said city centre, I'm not saying that doesn't necessarily work, it does work, but there are factors that you need to consider. Let's talk about location then. Where's a good place to set up a service accommodation property? Do you start with where you're living right now, or do you find location where it works?
There's a lot of things to consider with it. So, and I think a lot of it comes back to starting with your customer, as we said earlier. Start with your customer in mind and work with that end in mind. And you've got to look around. Ideally, you would like to be within probably half an hour to an hour tops, really, drive time of where you're based. If you're physically going to manage these properties, obviously, if you need to get there for whatever reason, you don't want to be driving, a couple of hours in order to get to the place. So it needs to be really kind of close to where you're located, or somewhere where you're planning to spend a fair bit of time. So that'd be the first thing. You can obviously employ managing agents. We for example, manage property on behalf of other people. So if you can find a location and then find a managing agent that you can trust, that could possibly work as well. But the main thing is making sure these things will actually rent out, and that's probably the key thing. So it's thinking about who your guest is, why are they going to be in the area, why would they need to stay there short term? Is there a university close by? Is there good travel links? So is there railway stations, bus stations, motorway networks, this sort of thing? It could be that there, is there a big infrastructure project going on at the moment? You've only got to take some of the big rail infrastructure stuff that's going on at the moment, and you can think, well, there's probably going to be a need for people that wouldn't normally be in that area to stay in that area for the next sort of few months or maybe even few years. So it's really about thinking about what's going to draw people into that location, and really kind of zone in on that. I think is the key thing.
And when we're doing research in terms of where specifically this can work, so we can either start with where is it already there's a demand for, and I guess if we look at some of these large hotels that we have around the place, 200 odd rooms. They didn't get one morning decide, actually, we're going to put 200 rooms there. They've done a huge amount of research.
Spent a lot of money.
They know the demand is there.
Mm-hmm.
So that can be a very easy way to establish, actually, there's already some demand here for this type of clientele. And we need to think about different types of hotels. So, you have your budget hotels to your premium hotels as well, and everything in between, attracting different types of clients. Alternative, you could start with where you have your existing properties yourself. If you're starting with, say, your own portfolio of properties that you're transitioning across to this, which is how we started. Idas and I, we looked at our existing properties and thought, we've got 15 odd studios we could probably use for this, but we didn't switch them all across in one go. We tested it a little bit, and as we got comfortable with that, we shifted across to those, and then we've got some other properties to take on, and we've got some on rent to rent as well, using this particular strategy, which is working quite well. But we're not managing for others right now, and I know that's something you are doing.
Yeah.
So when we're thinking about the location, that's kind of one of the things we need to consider. But then also when we come to take on these properties, how do we find them if we haven't already got properties we can use in this way? What would you suggest in terms of getting started to find these properties?
I think you need to start with where the properties are being advertised, really. So the normal estate agents are going to have all these properties on their books that are available for rent at the moment. So the key thing is building relationships with some estate agents. So I would probably recommend talking to probably the independent estate agents to start off with. I mean, don't rule any estate agents out, because they've all got the possibilities. So once you're kind of fairly comfortable in an area that you're looking to get into, I would probably suggest finding the independent estate agents, going into the estate agents and having a chat with them and seeing what they've got on their books. And effectively just tell them what you do.
Yes.
Effectively tell them what you're looking to do.
This will be primarily letting agents as opposed to sales agents. So these are agents that have properties on the markets that they're looking to rent out.
Yeah.
So when you have a property like this, I know we've got a beautiful property here. We're going to look around and we're going to show some more of the property in a short while.
Yeah.
When you're trying to take on a property like this from an agent, and I know this is a thing many people that try this strategy get stuck with, and I emphasize the word try because I think it's just they give up too easily, which is why they don't succeed. There's many people doing this strategy very, very well in a short space of time, 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, building significant incomes. Now, when you're approaching an agent and you're having a conversation about a property like this, and as you said, you just need to be transparent and say, look, this is what you intend to do, this is how I intend to run it. The reality is, if you're running it as a beautiful 4-5-star equivalent hotel, it's going to be kept in so much better condition than a small family with a pet in the house, for example. And that's a great selling point. People don't think about that.
This is it. I think we put these barriers up because we're concerned about you going to an agent and you're asking them to do something with a property that they're probably not used to you kind of doing. It's something different. But you've got to look at, what are the advantages to the estate agent, what are the advantages to you, and what are the advantages to the landlord as well. And I think if you can keep those things in mind when you're talking to agents, then I think you've got a much better chance of being able to secure a property. And when you're talking to the agents, there's no point. I've heard a lot. Going back to the unscrupulous trainers and stuff. People just sort of saying, "Well, just book a viewing, go along and see it," and all this sort of. I think just be open and honest from day one. Just tell them exactly what it is that you want to do with the property. And if they don't agree with it, or if they don't, they don't want you to do that, they're not interested, and that's fine. Just move on to a different agent. There's plenty of them out there. There's plenty of property out there. So, and I think it's as you say, it's about understanding and what's the value in that you're giving to the landlord at the end of the day. 'Cause it's their property, and if you can go in and say, I want to rent this property off you for the next 5 years. I'm going to guarantee the rent to you, and I'm going to keep it in A1 condition. I mean, if someone came to me and said, I want to rent one of your properties off you like that, then why would you say no? Because that's really all landlords want, is a guaranteed income, with no voids, and for the property to be in good condition if and when it's handed back to them, really. So.
Absolutely, it's a win-win. But when we're talking to agents, particularly letting agents, it's not what they're normally used to. They're used to somebody coming in to say, I'm going to live here. They give them an application form. They complete it. So it's outside of their normal processes, which is another reason why, as you mentioned, the independents will be easier to work with rather than the big chains. Because even if the individual agent in the big chain understands what you're trying to do, it's very likely, as they try and get it across the managers and their general processes, it's going to be more difficult. I'm not saying impossible, it's just going to be more difficult. So rather than trying to push the snowball uphill, you're better off going to somewhere where it's going to be a little bit easier, the independent agents you can speak to. And getting the first one is always more difficult.
Totally.
Once you've got the first one, it's so much easier. So we gave a classic example just here, as if you're going to create this fantastic environment that can be used as your case study for your second, your third, and your fourth. It's so much easier to do that. So, we've talked about then how to find them, primarily agents. What other ways can we find these type of properties?
So I would look also at developments that are going on at the moment. So so if you can look at buildings that are currently either being built or currently being converted, and you can contact the developer directly, which gives you two kind of key things. If they're looking to sell those properties, for example, you could approach them and say, how would you like to sell these properties that, with essentially a 5-year lease that's already in place. So whoever's buying them off you has got a guaranteed income for the next 5 years. So that's one good way. The other side of that is you could take them from the developer direct if they're planning to hold the properties. So if they're planning to build them and actually, they call it a build to rent strategy. So they're actually going to hold the properties themselves. And obviously you can go in and talk to them and rent them directly from the developer. And so you do avoid a lot of the issues that come up with things like leases and some of the pitfalls that you're probably going to mention. That we're going to talk about a bit later on.
Yes. So when you're talking to developers about build to rent, it's much more common now. Whereas previously the strategy generally developers would use was to build it out and sell it. That was the only exit. But now build to rent is more common. So if you're having those conversations, they'll understand what it is you're trying to get at. And so just putting some context around this particular building here, as we mentioned, it's a building of 8 units that the developer renovated and restored and modernised at the same time to create these units. So he's effectively got one commercial mortgage on the building. He's the freeholder. There's no other leases. He controls it. So ticking the box for all these issues that we talked about, and hence the benefit of speaking to the owner of the whole building, as opposed to trying to do a deal on one apartment, which is a segment within a big building, which is probably going to come with many conditions and probably restrictions as well in terms of running it properly.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sam, we've talked about these as a product in terms of what you need to create, where you need to create them, how we can find them to get them set up as well. So let's talk about finding the guests that are actually going to come in and pay us some money.
Sure, yeah, okay. So they're probably the easier part of it. Actually, finding if you've done the right research on location, you've got your product right, that sort of thing. Actually getting the guests in should be the easiest part of the whole jigsaw puzzle, really. I think people do leave them because of that. People do get a bit complacent, to be perfectly honest. So pre-lockdown, you could pretty much take a property in the right location, just stick it on Airbnb or Booking.com, and you're more or less going to get guests as long as it's at the right sort of price. So it is really important to they're pretty easy platforms to use. It's pretty easy to get the guests through there. But you don't want to be reliant just on the platforms. They're known in the industry as OTAs, online travel agents. And there's probably, on top of Airbnb and Booking.com, there's hundreds out there that you can advertise on. So it's good to be, a range across a number of platforms. But what we found during the lockdown is that Airbnb and Booking.com really just shut everybody's calendars down. So they kind of were in control of your business. And it's never a good idea to be building your business in somebody's backyard. So what I would also recommend is once is kind of use those as lead generation. So use them to get the guests in, and then learn about your guest type, learn about the companies that are coming and staying with you, make contact with them, find out if you can then get them to book direct with you, because that obviously then saves you money on the fees as well. So the more direct bookings that you can do, the better. So I think everybody, including us that starts out in the industry, is reliant on the OTAs to start off with. And as your business grows, you then transition from those into more direct bookings, and people are actually either booking on your website, or they're just phoning you and making bookings like that.
Yeah. So I guess the key takeaway there is, although this part of the strategy is quite easy in terms of finding the guests, we shouldn't get complacent and lazy relying on these big OTAs. We should ensure that we've got some alternative methods and mechanisms of finding our guests as well. So I guess what we're sharing with people today, when you're watching this video right now, is really a knowledge and experience of been doing this for a little while. And we talked about, you and I work together, and although we originally worked together on the Inner Circle when you joined the program as a mentee, in fact more recently we've been working together where you've been helping me deliver some of the support and training for people on the Inner Circle. And those that are starting out, because on the Inner Circle we have the 3 levels which I've talked about before, which is the startup, speed up and scale up. And the startup level is for those that are brand new, that are just starting out. And on that strategy, that's where we work together in helping people find a strategy where really you're working more closely with them, helping them find the right strategy, and then really over the 12 months supporting them in the implementation of that strategy. And in the startup program of the Inner Circle, it's more training as well, which you take a lead on, in terms of delivering the information on the how-to, which is really much more deeper version of what we're talking about right now, to ensure that you have the knowledge, because on the other levels of the program, it's more about filling in the knowledge gaps and about support. But at this level of the program, the one we work on together, it's really about getting people from where they are up and running on a specific strategy and supporting them at the early stages.
Yeah, absolutely.
So now would be maybe a good time for us to have a little look around the rest of the property as well, and then we'll come back and we'll talk about the final piece of the systems, because we talked about this can be quite a time-intensive strategy, but how can we make it so that it doesn't have to take necessarily all our time, what systems we use for that. So we'll come back, we'll have a little look around, we'll then we'll talk about the systems, and then before we finish, we're going to be sharing the 3 mistakes that we find most people make with this strategy when they get started with it. So should we go and have a little look? Yeah, let's do that.
Okay. Come on, after you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, so this is one of the 2 bedrooms in the property. So this is a 2-bedroom apartment, and we try and obviously do these to a really high standard. So just to point out a couple of things in this room, we've got a king-size bed. So this bed is actually made up of 2 single beds. So it's what's known as a zip-link bed. So it basically means that you can separate the beds if guests want to come and stay. So quite often you'll get guests that come that will be happy to share a room, but they don't necessarily want to share a bed. So this just gives us flexibility. So what we do is we put these in both bedrooms, so it can either sleep one person in each room, or it could potentially sleep 4 people that don't want to sleep in separate beds. So again, you're just kind of making it more universal and more available to different guest types. And just to give you a couple of tips on some cost saving things, so you can get some really good effects without having to spend a fortune. So for example, the pictures on the wall are these are wallpaper that's been sourced from, I think it's actually from Laura Ashley, and then it's just been framed. So it's a really good, cost-effective way of creating some pictures. So they're just normal picture frames. And then things like the bedside tables, for example, have been upcycled. So they've we bought them fairly cheap, and then we've had them painted and upcycled. But they create a really good effect because they're actually fitting quite well with the property. Also, just to highlight the hanging rack as well. in that to put like a huge wardrobe in here might be quite overpowering for the building. And actually, when people are just staying for a few nights, they don't need really a massive amount of storage space. So they're quite happy just to kind of hang coats and clothes up and stuff on there. So, okay, so if we just head up the stairs through into the bathroom at the top there, that's what I like about this property. It's just really quirky. It's been done to a really nice standard. Yeah, the property's been converted to a really high standard, and what attracted us to the property to take it on in the first place was the really high level of finish that's been done to. The developer that actually converted the property didn't skimp or anything on the fixtures and fittings. It's all been done really nicely, and that's obviously going to appeal to our guests as well, and hopefully be able to for us to or it has been able for us to get a really good price per night for the property and get returning guests as well. We've had some really good reviews. And and it's being able to provide that high-end luxury product that we've been looking for.
Sam, thank you for showing us around. It really is a beautiful property. Now, I know one thing that I hear a lot of people saying, it's a very time-intensive strategy. It takes a huge amount of time. I know it takes more time, or it can take more time than some of the other strategies, but it generates a huge amount more cash flow as well. But the reality is it doesn't really have to take so much time.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got certain systems and processes in place that help us to negate the amount of time that we have to spend either coming to the property or actually managing the property. And there's a few little tips I can share if you want me to.
Useful if you want to share a few tips with us. For somebody that's watching and somebody that's thinking about this, what kind of systemization tips could you share with us? Yeah,
so when you're first starting out, you can probably just manage a property on your own fairly easily. But as you start to scale, there's certain bits of software and certain apps that you could bring in that will really help you to prevent you from getting double bookings, making sure that your property's at the right price. And these are called channel managers. So a channel manager is essentially a bit of software that allows you that basically sits between the property and all the different platforms where your property is advertised on. So it'll basically enable you to keep control of when bookings are coming in, when prices are changing, and that sort of stuff. So so the channel manager is one key bit of software I'd think about. One of the second key ingredients is finding really good cleaners, which might sound kind of strange. It's like, well, why do cleaners kind of come into us? But really, your cleaners are your eyes and ears on the ground of who's actually going to see the property on a regular basis. They're coming in and out of the property, maybe a few times a week. They can tell you whether there's any maintenance problems. They can tell you whether there's, the guests have left any mess or anything like that, or just keep you abreast of any issues that are going on. So you don't have to be physically visiting the property.
So although we call them the cleaning and the cleaning team, the reality is they're doing way more than just cleaning.
Absolutely, yeah. They're more what you would probably class as housekeepers, or absolutely, and they're absolutely key. And we make sure we really look after our cleaners, because we've realised how much we kind of rely on them, So
hopefully they won't be watching this, or they won't be putting their price up.
Yeah, they might be putting a higher invoice in now. I've said that, which so I may have to rephrase that. But no, they are definitely worth their weight in gold, So
share one more with us.
So one more would be going back to your guest type. So thinking about your guest type, because if you've got guests that are coming and staying for 2 nights, all the time, so you're having a changeover once every 2 nights. That's obviously going to put a lot of strain on, whether a guest has paid, whether when the cleaners have got to come in and out, making sure obviously the property's right. So the longer you can get your guests to stay for, the better, really, in my book, because the longer they stay for, the more hands off it is. So if you can concentrate on guest types that are probably going to be in the property for more than at least a week at a time, ideally a month, 2 months at a time. That's ideal, because really you're then you're finding the best world between service accommodation and single lets. Because essentially, if they're in here for say 6 months, essentially you've got a single let tenant, so they're going to be in here for that amount of time, but you're charging them service accommodation rates. So that's really where you get your economies of scale, and you actually really boost your profits.
Fantastic, Sam. Thank you so much for sharing with us.
No, you're welcome.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to showing the property today.
No problem at all, my pleasure.
And I know, how passionate you are about helping other people as well. We work together in supporting other people in their property journey. And if people want to reach out to us about the program, they know how to connect with me. So if people want to reach out to you, what's the best way to connect with you?
I'm on all the social media channels, so probably either Facebook or LinkedIn is probably the best place to get hold of me. And if anybody's interested in looking at the more of the mentoring or training side of things, then I'd probably direct them over to the sajhussain.com website. And I'm sure you'll be posting all these links into the notes below on this video.
Yeah, so the Inner Circle program, it's not just about service accommodation. The Inner Circle program really is about helping you achieve your property goals. It may be service accommodation, maybe we focus more on that. Yeah. It could be HMOs, it could be flips, it could be developments. Really, it's about focusing on the specific goals. So thank you so much, Sam.
No problem at all, thank you.
So if you've watched this bit, first of all, I have to say thank you so much. And I promised you 3 tips on the biggest mistakes that people are making when they're doing this strategy. So Sam, when people are doing this strategy, service accommodation, what are the 3 biggest mistakes that you find people make?
So I'd say the first one that people make is not complying with rules and regulations. So they'll take a property on that they can't do what they want to do with the property because something legally stops them from doing it. And it's normally either lease conditions or mortgage conditions. The second biggest mistake I would suggest is people tend to overpay for the property. So the amount that they're paying to the landlord each month in rent is too much really. They're guaranteeing this property for say the next 5 years, and they tend to pay over the odds because they kind of get all excited about taking this property on. So do your numbers, make sure that your numbers stack up, and don't get overexcited about taking the property on. And then the third one is probably location. Again, going back to that, we talked earlier about going back to who your customer type is and really understanding who that is and making sure that property that you're about to take on works in the location that you've taken it on. So those are the 3 key mistakes I see people making.
That's great, Sam. Thank you so much once again.
No, you're welcome. Thank you.
I would like to say a big thank you for watching this vlog. I'm really enjoying spending some of my time sharing this knowledge and experience. Hopefully you're learning from this too. And if you're finding this useful, I ask for one thing, and that's give me some YouTube love. What I mean by that is make sure you hit the like button. And look, if you don't like the video, just make sure you hit the dislike button twice. And of course, hit the subscribe button as well, and make sure you're notified when new videos are available so that you can see them as and when we release them, because I'll continue to do these as long as you're enjoying them, as long as you let me know. Let me know in the comment section below what else you'd like to see, what other things you'd like me to cover, and whether you're finding a video like this where we're going into more detail useful, and if this is what you want to see. If you missed last week's video where we talked about the changes that have just happened in regulation, make sure you click up there to watch that. And if you haven't watched the first vlog, make sure you click down here to watch that, because that's where this journey began, and I look forward to seeing you on next week's vlog.